All right, this is Anatomy Unit 2. Remember in Unit 1 we covered anatomical regions, directions, just special terms, all that good stuff. Now we're actually getting into tissues, parts of the body, and we're going to talk about the diversity of all the tissues in the body. In the next couple of units after this one, we'll start looking at organ systems, which, remember, Murder's Link. But before we get into that, it's important to understand what these organs that are found in organ systems are made out of, okay? So follow along with me in your Google Slides that should be linked. I do not need those submitted to me, but you will see lots of blanks. I think your first one is like right here. You'll want to fill in those blanks to have them for your student notes as we go along. Yours looks exactly like mine with pictures, same bullet points, all that good stuff, okay? So stay with me during the video, just like if we were sitting in class. So tissue is very diverse. Diverse means very different. All of them beneficial, but they're different in several different ways, many of which we'll talk about, okay? So tissues are what we call groups of specialized cells with a common structure and function. You might remember from biology that the cell is the smallest unit of life. Smallest unit of life. We're composed of trillions of cells. But certain cells that are similar group together in things called tissues, okay? And there are 4 different types of tissues found in humans. Today's lecture, discussion, notes, whatever you want to call it, are going to be dealing with the epithelial tissue, okay? We have connective, muscle, and nervous as well. You might have heard of a couple of those: connective tissue, muscle tissue, of course. But epithelial oftentimes gets overlooked, but it's probably one of the most diverse. So let's take a look at it. So tissues are groups of cells. Here's just a picture showing the different types. So epithelial tissue, also known as the epithelium, this covers all body structures. Okay, so we're talking about anything that's internal, whether the surface of your stomach, for example, it has epithelial tissue on it. It also lines the passageways and tubes in your body, so the inside of your mouth from your cheek has epithelial tissue. Also, we talk about the outside, so the skin. The skin also has epithelial tissue, and then glands, which we'll spend a little more time talking about. But when you look at epithelium, no matter what the type, and we're going to get into them, they have 2 main parts, okay? One is a free surface. It's got a free surface. This is the side of it, if you want to think of it like this. It's the sides that are exposed to the outside or the open space internally. It's not touching anything, okay? It's not touching anything. Think if you had a pancake laying on a griddle, okay? Think about a pancake on a griddle. There'd be 2 sides to that pancake. One is attached to that griddle, if you will. It may not be stuck to it, but it is resting against it. Okay, the other side is open to air, right? It's open to air. The free surface of epithelial is the one that's open to nothing, okay? Whether it's the external air that your skin's exposed to, or think about the lining of your esophagus. There's part of it that's open to the tube part, the hollowed out part, that's nothing touching it, okay? Has a free surface. And then the other side of the pancake, or the epithelium, is connected to what we call the basement membrane. This underside of the tissue is always anchored to connective tissue, which we'll learn about more later, by this very thin non-cellular layer called the basement membrane. The thing about epithelial tissue or the epithelium, it doesn't have blood vessels, okay? It doesn't have blood vessels. And you just think, well, you just told me my skin, it's the epithelium. Yes, the outermost layer is epithelial tissue. Right underneath that, where the basement membrane starts to connect to connective tissues, that's where the blood vessels are. When we talk about the integumentary system, we'll look at that a little closer. But think about biting the inside of your cheek. We've all been eating something, we bite it. Sometimes it doesn't bleed. That's because we've just bitten into the epithelial tissue, okay? Once we hit blood, we know we've gone through the epithelial tissue into some connective tissues, okay? So there's the 2 parts, and then also always remember, if it doesn't bleed, it's epithelial. All right, when we look at epithelial, there's 2 different types of ways to look at it, okay, that describes it, what it looks like. Now remember, there's tons of different types of epithelial tissue throughout your body, so this is a systematic way to organize our thoughts about what the different types of epithelial look like. So the first way to look at it is based on the number of cell layers each type has. If we call it simple epithelium, we're talking about one single layer. So simple, something very easy, one single layer. Now some of the epithelial in our body may be one layer of flat cells. We'll call them what they are in a minute. They may look like cubes, but they're still one layer. And then also some of them may look like columns that you might have seen, you know, at a house or a big fancy building. They have these columns. They're long. They're bigger, taller than they are wide. But they're still one layer, one, and one. Okay. Simple epithelium has one layer. And you can see a very different part here. Stratified epithelium, consists of one layer of cells, okay? Now only one's going to be at that basement membrane, that side of the pancake that's touching the pan, touching the connective tissue. But look how many layers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we lose count even here, okay? So when it's simple epithelium, one layer. Stratified epithelium, we got 2 or more layers. Normally it's a lot of layers, okay, with stratified. So stratified, many layers. Then we've got something called pseudo-stratified. Don't be scared of that big word. Pseudo simply means fake, okay? A pseudonym is a fake name that somebody would take on. Pseudo means fake, so it's fake stratified epithelium, pseudo-stratified. And why we call it that is that all of the cells that it makes up is attached to the basement membrane. So in essence, we only have one layer of cells. But whereas the simple ones, we can clearly see this is one layer of cells. Notice how there's big ones, there's small ones, they're all different heights, but they're all attached here at the basement membrane. We call this pseudo-stratified because it's a fake stratified. It looks like there's lots of layers, but there's really not. There's really not, okay? A dead giveaway for pseudo-stratified is all these nuclei. These are the little black spots. We'll look at some pictures later on underneath a microscope, well, pictures of underneath the microscope, where we can see it, and they're all everywhere. They're up and down and all over the place, and it makes you think it's stratified, but if we follow every one of them back down to the basement membrane, we can tell they're all connected there. So they're fake stratified, pseudo-stratified. Okay, so those are the 3 different names. Now, we can also classify epithelium based on the cell shape. Okay, so the shape of them. Squamous cells are flat or scale-like. Okay, squamous, almost like they're squished, all right, or squashed, however you want to call it. So they're squamous, they're squished down, they're squashed down. The other shape is cuboidal, just like a really nice ice cube. That is this, like a playing dice, okay, that you throw. A cuboidal cell. Notice the difference. This looks like a flattened scale. This one looks like a cube, okay, like a playing dice, the 6-sided die that you throw in most board games, okay. So cuboidal, the name gives it away. Cuboidal, shaped like a cube. Then we have columnar. Columnar cells are taller than they are wide, just like those columns, okay. They're taller and they're more narrow than they are wide. So think about what we've just talked about. There's 2 different ways that we name epithelial tissue. One is by the number of layers that it has. The other name is by what the cells look like. Think about somebody with a first and middle name, okay? When you're really in trouble, you might know what I'm talking about. Your parent may call you your first and middle name. This is just like that, except they're not in trouble. Okay, they have this first and middle name, and both of them can describe the exact same cell, but it's just looking at it from 2 different points. It's the first and middle name, okay? One's on the number of layers, one is the shape, all right? Number of layers, and the other one's the shape. So that's what this says. They're given 2 names. First name, number of layers. Second name, shape of the cell at the free surface. This is a variety. You will look at these, know these. They're in your notes, okay? I didn't try to hide them somewhere. I want you to study these. I want you to make, I even tell you here, this is a great diagram to study and understand. Wink, wink. You will have a quiz on this. This will be on the exam, okay? This is a slide you'll want to remember, okay? Let's talk about the different names that they have, and then you can always come back to this and say, makes sense now, all right? First type, simple squamous epithelium. That sounds scary, but it's not, because we know what first and middle names mean right here. Simple tells us there's one layer. Okay? There's one layer. Simple is the one layer of cells. Squamous is that squished, okay, or it's scale-like. So simple squamous epithelium is one layer of flattened cells. Right? This is the thinnest epithelial tissue of the body. Okay, the thinnest one we'll find. It's found in like the air sacs of your lungs, where oxygen and carbon dioxide are passed in and out of the bloodstream into air. Okay, so it needs to be very thin. It needs to be very thin. You see its functions there. It filters things, it diffuses things. Osmosis is simply the diffusion of water. Hopefully you remember that from biology. Water moving from a higher concentration to a lower concentration. Or like in the air sacs of the lungs, it's diffusing air from the air you just breathe in into the bloodstream. Okay, so simple squamous epithelium. Second kind, simple cuboidal epithelium. Think about that name. Simple tells us there's one layer of cuboidal cells. That's the shape. So one layer of these cube-like cells. Okay, make sense of that. Understand, if you saw this picture, you would know, oh, that's simple cuboidal epithelium, because you know what those two names are. All right, don't overcomplicate it. Do not overthink it just because those words are words you may never heard before. All right, these function to secrete, which means to spit out some type of liquid or ooze some type of liquid. It also means to absorb. That's just like a sponge absorbs water. Several places in the bodies we can find those. The ovaries of the female reproductive system, inside the kidneys, also certain glands. Okay. The next type is simple columnar epithelium. One layer of column-shaped cells. Okay. That's what the epithelium is composed of. We see again absorption, secretion, and also protection. Think about it. You're getting a thicker layer now. You're getting something thicker. This would protect more so than a simple squamous layer because it's very thin. There's not a lot of protection there. The lining of the uterus. So, ladies, female reproductive system, you know that about one time a month you slough off or you lose the lining of the uterus. You're losing epithelial tissue in the form of simple columnar. You may say, well, what about the blood? There would also be connective tissues underneath there that slough off as well, or you lose as well. But you're losing this epithelial tissue as well. The stomach and the intestines. When we look in the digestive system, we'll see that there's a lot of rough and tough activity as food gets processed through the body. It needs this thicker layer of protection. All right. This is a little intimidating, but pseudostratified columnar epithelial. Think about what the word means. This is that fake stratified. Notice where the nuclei, they're all over the place, multi-layers, right? But they're all attached. Every one of these cells is attached to the basement membrane. Pseudostratified columnar, they look like columns. They're taller than they are wide. Epithelial. Protection again, secretion, also mucus movement. So think about mucus. We'll get more into it. We've probably all, hocked a loogie or something like that. It's lining the linings of the respiratory passages. So in the nose, along in the back of the throat, things like that, this tissue would be found there. Pseudostratified columnar. Then we've got stratified squamous epithelium. Okay, and this is layered for protection. Outer layers of the skin. You can, if you've had dandruff or you get a sunburn or something like that, you can scratch your arm and lose some layers of the skin, but you're not losing all the layers. It's because it's stratified. There's many, 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 many layers of these actually flat-looking cells. And this is good. It's for protection, but it's also, you can lose them, and there's still more being made. In these stratified layers, new cells are made at the basement membrane and pushed up. So even if you don't get a sunburn or you don't scratch your arm, you're still going to lose these layers, okay? Because as the new ones are made, it pushes up and causes those other ones to be lost. Linings of the oral cavity, so in your mouth, the throat, the vagina, the anal canal. Think about why these would be found in the anal canal. Because as you defecate or as you lose waste products, you poop, it's going to take some cells with it, right? It's going to be exiting the body fairly forcefully, and it's going to scrape off some of these cells. It's a good thing there's not only one layer, otherwise you would have no epithelial a lot of time, but it can lose these layers. It can afford to lose these layers because they're constantly making more in this stratified epithelial. This is what your cheek cells look like under a microscope. Notice they look like a little scale that you might see on a fish. They're very flat. This is the nuclei, all right? So the middle part, hopefully you remember from biology, that the nuclei, of course, where the DNA is found in the cells. So your cheek is a great example of stratified squamous. Then we got stratified cuboidal. Again, this is protection. Stratified meaning more than one layer in little shapes of cubes, cuboidal. Larger ducts, mammary glands in females. We got sweat glands, salivary glands. You can see most glands there. Anything that secretes. They need a little more protection because a lot of times these are thicker type liquids that are coming from the body. Even sweat, we don't think about it being thick, but it has a lot of material found in it. So anyway, it needs different layers in case we do lose a few layers with that liquid being produced from the body. And the cuboidal shape gives it a little extra protection in these glands. Stratified columnar, we know many layers of columns. The protection and also secretion. We find this in the vas deferens and the male urethra. These are part of the male reproductive system. And also in the pharynx, so your throat area. Stratified, many layers, columnar, that's the shape of them, that's those columns. We also have something called transitional epithelium, which we didn't get to talk about earlier, but now we're talking about it. This is transitional epithelium, doesn't look like anything else, okay? It can have many layers of different types of cells. This rough sketch here shows us these are cuboidal cells, and then we start seeing these squamous cells down here, okay? So transitional is a mixture of all these other types. The thing is, we don't find it in a lot of other places other than the urinary system. So we got the bladder, the ureters, the urethra, which moves urine out of the body. It's about stretchability, okay? It's about stretchability. If you've known someone that ever had a kidney stone, you know that that's a fairly large object moving through these fairly small or narrow tubes. There needs to be some stretchability for things like that to be able to move through. Now, that's not a normal situation, but it's why somebody may not have to have an operation, because this transitional epithelium is able to stretch. Think about the bladder. How if you don't have to go to the bathroom, it's fairly small. We'll learn about that. And as you need to go to the restroom, it starts to fill up like a balloon with urine, okay? With urine. If this transitional epithelium was not there and wasn't adding this flexibility, this stretchability, it would be very painful when you had to use the restroom. But thankfully, it can swell up like a balloon, and you don't have to go pee every 5 minutes, all right? Then we've got another special one called glandular epithelium. It's all about secretion. It's found in the glands. We'll talk more about the glands in the endocrine system. For right now, I want you to know the exocrine gland, this is glands that open to the outside of the body. Anytime you see exo as a prefix, you know it's exit or open to the external, all right? Endocrine glands open to the inside. Glands that secrete their products directly into tissue, fluids, or blood without any ducts open to the outside. Just a special type of epithelium. Know those other ones primarily. All right, and that brings us to connective tissue. So that is all for our notes today. Please go back and look at this slide. Understand what the two names of epithelial mean. Remember, the first one's number of layers. The second one refers to the shape of the cell. These 7 are ones that you need to have memorized. Wink, wink, nod, nod. You got a quiz on them coming up. All right? So fill in your notes. Go back and watch this video however many times you need to. And let me know if you have any questions. Thanks.